I'll start by quickly introducing myself. My name is Yaniv Bar-Dayan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Vulcan Cyber. Vulcan Cyber is a company that is focusing on vulnerability remediation, meaning we're trying to shift the mindset of vulnerability managers, and more importantly, the center of gravity of vulnerability management programs from assessment and detection to actual remediation. And to do so, one of the things that we have talked about and have focused on is that vulnerability management is not only a tech problem, it is also a process and people problem. And if we would have go in and just jump on the first tech issue that we would have found, we would probably fail in trying to solve this 20-year-old problem that surrounds us and still somehow remains one of the biggest challenges. So what I'm going to focus today mainly is about the methodology that we call remediation orchestration, and moreover about the maturity model, which is the heart of this methodology, that allowed us to eventually take vulnerability management programs of different customers, of different verticals and sizes, and turn them to more effective, more automatic, more remediation driven, eventually also more successful. I think it goes without saying that vulnerability management today is probably one of the most difficult and most risk-oriented issues that security personnel needs to face today. When we look at the numbers, they're actually astonishing. We can talk about the fact that 99% of vulnerabilities exploited during 2020 are the ones that are previously known to security teams, not the 0 days, not the ones that are held by, the variety of NSAs out there, but the ones that everyone could take off the internet, take a proof of concept and start driving it towards malicious use. There are also a lot of different things that are happening in the vulnerability management space. I mean, we're going to talk about the association of a vulnerability in our mind and the association of an asset in our mind, because traditionally, when we talk about vulnerabilities, we usually go directly to CVEs that are reported on infrastructures. But in the modern world, a security vulnerability is way more. It's also an AppSec finding, either in your code or in your dynamic applications. It could be a misconfiguration in one of your cloud workloads. It could be something that is found on your container image or container images or in your Kubernetes clusters. And we need to stop, and this is something that is going to be a recurring theme in what I'm talking today. We need to break this association to take the next step towards a more orchestrated vulnerability remediation program. The other side is also the way we are talking about assets. An asset traditionally has an association to a PC or a server, but a digital asset in the modern world is also an AMI in Amazon, an image of a Docker, a serverless function, a code base, a dynamic app. All of these together are being scanned and in turn are being owned and managed by external factors, the security teams, and has to be addressed in a way that will eventually lead to vulnerability remediated and not just vulnerability found. And the bottom line is, as much as we want to fight it, 60% of the breaches in 2019, this is from the latest Verizon data breach report, were involving an unpatched vulnerability. So focusing on that and laser focusing on vulnerability and patch management is probably one of the most rewarding activities, the most cost-effective activities that you could pile into when it comes to your vulnerability management program and your cybersecurity program as a whole. Now, I think it's very clear to everyone that remediating even one single vulnerability is an extremely difficult task. It requires a complex process and way too much time that needs to be involved across different teams, not only security, but also IT or DevOps or engineering. And the interesting thing about it is that when we look at the market, when we look at what happened in the past 20 years in the vulnerability management, patch management market, what we've seen that security companies traditionally had focused only on the first step and a half of what needs to be addressed in this program. The vast majority of tools are focusing on scanning and discovery They're focusing on finding new issues in new types of infrastructures, new types of applications, scanners for containers, scanners for cloud environments, scanners for new type of infrastructures, scanners for the cloud. All of them provides us with lists of issues that, honestly speaking, we will never manage to solve. This is why a new generation of vulnerability management platforms had emerged in the past decade, focusing mainly on consolidation of these lists into one coherent list, what we call a better list. It will eventually help you at least focus your efforts across these different types of findings to where it matters most. But also there are a lot of pieces that are missing in this equation of consolidation and prioritization. It's usually focused on threat intelligence and not really based on the configuration of the asset or the business factor. It does not take under consideration a lot of different activities that has to be done from a research perspective, like finding the right solution, or are there any mitigations we could apply, like configuration changes or competent controls to actually remediate the vulnerability. And then, not to mention the manual work on collaborating with the right asset owner. And sometimes you even have several asset owners on several types of assets. So the same server could have 3 owners, one for the database, one for the application, one for the OS, creates a lot of different processes that are extremely complex. And from the moment we've actually delegated, because we are eventually not the ones that are going to remediate the issue, it's going to be very hard for us to manage and track everything that's going on. Are we meeting SLAs? Are we actually patching? How do we handle rejections? All of these are some kind of black hole that we don't have any visibility to. And this creates a very ineffective and honestly friction-full operation when it comes to vulnerability management. And the impact of it is in the time you invest. So when Vulcan looks at the biggest issue of vulnerability management problems that is not related to the risk, because the risk is the goal of it, is the amount of time it takes us. In 2019, the average enterprise in the United States had spent 450 hours per week to address the vulnerability management and patch management issues. Now, this is a 30% increase from 2018. And this correlates directly to the growth of number of tools and the growth in the number of vulnerabilities we have to manage. And this is not something we foresee that is going to stop. This is actually something that is going to grow and grow. And to be honest, if this is the process we have to go through to just remediate one vulnerability across an asset set, it's already impossible to scale remediation when we're talking about numbers like tens of thousands, if not for some of Vulcan customers, millions and tens of millions of vulnerabilities that has to be remediated across infrastructure, applications, cloud environments, containers, and so on. The reason to that is actually kind of simple. Vulnerability management programs had changed dramatically, but the methodologies and the tools had not. If we look at how we have committed vulnerability management 20 years ago or 15 years ago, our job was fairly easy. We had one static data center. We had endpoints that are usually connected directly to the network. There were PCs, desktops for real, that are part of the enterprise network. And we had 2 tools. We had a scanner and we had a patch manager, and we used to scan quarterly, patch quarterly, and things were fairly okay. But as we drove in to 2020, where our digital footprint had grown dramatically as we went forward, there are a new variety of tools that provides a new variety of vulnerabilities for us to manage, but also for our counterparts, for our allies in the IT, DevOps, and engineering world. They also face the same issue. They manage Linux in one tool. They're managing Dockers in another. They're managing cloud environments in one way, and applications and delivery of applications on another. And this creates also workload, both mental and practical, on the tools that are part of the solution of this process. And this, again, impacts the number. We foresee that by 2025, the average enterprise in the United States will spend approximately 2,000 hours a week on chasing, prioritizing, and remediating vulnerability. Eventually translated to about $8 million a year for the average enterprise in the United States. And to get out of this, maybe the idea behind it, and I think this is something that was best phrased by a very, very dear friend of Vulcan, Jacob from Comcast. Most vulnerability management programs are focused on finding, as we said, and every vulnerability manager has all the vulnerability data. But the real challenge is taking this data and turn it into an actionable piece to actually drive remediation. And this is why when Vulcan starts engaging with customers, with or without the Vulcan tech side of things, and we advocate this model, no one has to be a Vulcan customer or a Vulcan prospect to use this model. This is a model we've been working on for 3 years, and we made it simple in order to allow organizations to understand the level of maturity their vulnerability management programs are, and in turn, know what are the steps they need to make and what are the tools and controls they need to apply to lead them to a mature, what we call transformative vulnerability management program. Very briefly, when we look at, and we've been talking with, I think today, already over 1,000 different enterprises across the globe, every vulnerability management program could be put in one of these silos. 95% of the programs we have seen are in stage one, what we call the reactive stage. They have a variety of sensors that are siloed. Some of them are not even touched at all on a day-to-day basis. They are providing these tools, these teams with lists, and these lists in turn are then being processed, prioritized, organized, and distributed by either one person or a group of people in an incoherent way. This creates what we call the fire drill mode. We get findings, we focus on the criticals, we operate super fast, super impulsively to remediate these vulnerabilities. We scan again, and we see that we need to be very lucky to actually move the needle. It's very hard for us to take data-driven decisions around vulnerability management when all of our data is spread around everywhere and we don't have an effective way to actually take decisions. The first step towards a mature vulnerability management program is what we call the data-driven stage. The stage where we take all these data silos, either the data silos of security, AppSec findings, Vul management findings, configurations in the cloud, and so on, and we put them in one in the same security data lake as different IT, DevOps, and engineering data. So collecting data from CMDBs and cloud environments and code repositories and everything that could give us more tools to make more sense out of the vulnerability management program. The two most important things that are happening when we put all the data in and hopefully have feeds to enrich this data, feeds around threats and feeds around solutions, is that we can do two things that will help us build better foundations to our vulnerability management program. One is turn ourselves from being very quantitative in our thought to being more qualitative in our thought. The first thing that you need to do is start augmenting these lists into something that you can benchmark upon. And it's a simple concept. Just produce a score that will reflect the risk from all the different vulnerabilities that you have and all the different assets that you have to something that is unique and something that is comparable. The score itself doesn't mean a lot. It could be 1 to 10, 1 to 1,000, A, B, C, and D. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that this score allows you to benchmark yourselves versus your own selves a quarter ago or half a year ago, but also benchmark yourself in front of your peers. And this gives you this mechanism where you're not chasing numbers, how many criticals I've solved or how many mediums I've solved. And with a lot of simple actions, could be catching a superseding KB through SCCM, or upgrading an OS level version or a kernel version, or applying a certain competency control in your firewall, to be able to mitigate a lot of risk in a way that will impact your benchmarks better and just say, I've resolved one critical vulnerability or 500 different mediums. Doesn't mean a lot when you count it like this. One environment that could have 1,000 vulnerabilities could be at no risk at all versus an environment that has one critical vulnerability on one critical asset and might be in super high risk. And this mechanism of consolidating the data eventually gives you the ability to drive forward actions that are more data-driven. And in this point, you have the ability also to drive them in a way that IT, DevOps, and engineering has the ability to act. Then the next thing you need to do is start aligning yourselves to the processes of IT, DevOps, and engineering. If you're trying to align them to you, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, you're going to lose the fight. You are focusing only on security. This is your center of gravity. For your allies in IT, engineering, and ops, this is just one more thing they have to do. So if we want to be successful, and if we want to build a successful vulnerability management program, we must become enablers. We must use the tools that we have. We must automate as much as we can to help the teams that are not security teams, that this is just one task and on the docket, to eventually operate effectively. This is where we get into the orchestrated stage and where we encourage different users and customers to start touching these different platforms, to integrate deeply to the ServiceNows and the Atlassians of the world, to try and provide more refined decisions or requests from IT. So not come with a request like upgrade, or I have a very severe CVE on this asset, but come with please upgrade this version to this version, or even provide them with something like an Ansible script, or build the patching programs for them within a SCCM to allow them to then drive their actions more effectively. And once you have built these processes, you've created these rails across the variety of teams you have to work with, then comes the holy grail, what we call the transformative stage. Vulnerability management is not a security problem. It's a business problem because it touches the heart of a business decision. Am I willing to accept the risk of patching in order to reduce the risk from a certain vulnerability? Am I willing to run myself with downtime, with loss of money, to not that in turn be breached and pay a fine? And this is not something that security can decide. This is something that the business persons, the product managers, the head of the business unit, the people who are actually responsible on the bottom line of the P&L needs to align. And this is something that we encourage also teams to do. It's about finding the right language. It's about providing the right tools to other teams to actually do that. So now, as you're starting to dig into these stages, in one of these areas, the big issue is, for example, in stage one, is focusing on CVSS. This is probably one of the core issues in stage one, because CVSS, as good as it is quantitative and not qualitative. There are a lot of things in stage one that are challenging, but the main ones are this dissonance between the number of vulnerabilities we're actually solving to how much risk we're actually reducing. These are two different things. Next up is the actual handoffs. How can we make sure that a decision that we took, because we are competing almost always on the same resources, on the same patching windows, on the same downtime windows, how do we know that patching a certain component is more important than fixing a vulnerable piece of code if we don't have all the data in one place and aligned to the same risk framework? How can we manage risk exclusions correctly and be aligned with compliance? All of these things are things that are super challenging for companies that are in stage one. When you're moving to stage two and you've already fixed these areas of quality versus quantity, of compliance readiness, of these handoffs between the different tools, comes the challenges of the manual work. These 450 hours a week are starting in stage two and moving along up to stage four. And this is where we need to put our egos aside, understand that in order to get to our goal, we need to improve the ways we communicate with IT people, with DevOps people, with engineering people, because they are the ones that are taking the work on actually remediating, and they are the ones that are going to determine if we are successful in our job or not. We can prioritize vulnerabilities until tomorrow, but if we're not driving remediation to these vulnerabilities, we're going to lose the game 100%. Stage three is already about communication to the business side. We have the policies in place. We have everything we need to a point where we can drive these actions without all of the manual workload. And now we have time to address and start educating the business people. We need to start talking about how can we report to the business actors? How can we communicate their risk levels? How can we encourage them to take security decisions without security's involvement? And down in stage four, where we're actually applying this, we're providing C-level visibility, we're providing this mindset, we're changing the DNA of the organization to focus more on remediation, then I hope that your challenges will be just too much free time and not anything else that is related to the actual vulnerability management program that you have. And this is the maturity model on the tip of the iceberg, where we operate with customers to promote what we call remediation orchestration. Remediation orchestration is the glue between the methodology and the maturity model to the actual technology that Vulcan brings. Each one of these stages has definitive business outcomes we want to provide to customers, from better asset management and asset tracking to better prioritization that is risk-based to compliance. And once you're doing that, you have matured from the data-driven stage. Then from the orchestrative stage, how do we define SLAs? How do we align remediation? How do we take smart remediation choices? How do we distribute data to the right operational teams in the right operational way? All of these things are tied in together to the tech, but I will say it again, you don't have to use Vulcan's tech to apply the model. The model could also be applied by tools you build yourselves, by different open source tools you use. But if you want to address it more broadly, Vulcan is probably a technology that will help you do so. And what Vulcan brings is super simple. Remediation orchestration is super simple. Vulcan first prioritizes this different list. It creates this better, super accurate list. It will find remedies. It will find the solutions to vulnerabilities using what we call Remedy Cloud, which is a remediation engine that has over 5 million different solutions in it in the form of patches, workarounds, configuration changes, competent controls that you can apply. It will be associated to your vulnerabilities and will tell you, this is what you can do in order to remediate a certain vulnerability, down to actually automating the process, delivering things like, opening tickets automatically on the right owners, to actually producing scripts, building patches, and allowing more and more of this manual work to be done automatically with that super direct focus on orchestrating this process and providing the visibility to the different teams to actually drive action. When we look at it, Vulcan is the glue that enables end-to-end remediation. It takes data through different APIs from different tools, so you don't have to deploy any new agents, any network taps, anything. All Vulcan does is ties all these technologies together, allowing security people to migrate to a single console, to a single pane of glass, while distributing this data in various forms to the actual remediators. It could be in the form of a ticket, but it could also be actually integrating directly with tools like Chef, Puppet, GitLab, Ivanti, CrowdStrike, and so on, in the form of actual remediation actions that could be either fully automated or just waiting to be ready for someone to click a button in Chef or to click a button in SSCM to actually drive remediation. A very good example for a company that has been a Vulcan advocate and a Vulcan customer for over 2 years almost is Snowflake. We've started working with Snowflake almost 2 years, where their vulnerability management program was really focused on trying to take this data, opening the tickets and driving remediation across a variety of teams, from corporate to cloud to others. We came in and we've replaced a homegrown solution through connecting to the different tools they are using, consolidating the data, providing custom risk that is tailor-made to the particular risk that Snowflake is facing, helping them distribute the data, getting the visibility to the process, counting and measuring the SLAs, and eventually provide remedies to the other teams in order to fit compliance, both patching compliance and security compliance, and drive these events effectively forward. I think that, without further ado, and before I'm going to jump in and show the platform for a bit, David, are there any particular questions or comments you'd like me to touch before jumping in and showing how the tech aligns with the maturity model very nicely?
I haven't seen any. I don't have any great presentation so far. I don't see any questions for everybody on the BrightTalk platform. You can ask questions to that, and then at the end, I think we can also just open it up through audio if that's possible. So I don't have anything right now. So if you want to go ahead and show us, how your solution remediates this in a demo, that would be great.
Of course. Just David, give it a thumbs up that you can see my screen.
Yes, I can.
Wonderful. Okay, everyone. So this is a glimpse into the Vulcan platform, but I'm actually not going to talk a lot about the features. I'm going to mainly talk about how the maturity model aligns into Vulcan. So if you recall, the first thing that we're going to do in order to mature a reactive stage, a stage one vulnerability management program into a stage two, is collect a lot of data from a lot of different tools and start migrating the quantitative discussion into a qualitative discussion. And you can already see that in the main dashboard. You can see quantitative matrix like 391 critical vulnerabilities that are in the platform or found in the platform in the past week, 15% decrease from the previous month. How many new vulnerabilities discovered, how many fixes are out there, but you could also see a score. The score doesn't directly connect to the number of critical vulnerabilities, but it actually compiled out of a very sophisticated algorithm that knows how to fuse different vectors from the technical severity of a vulnerability, from the threats in the wild, which I'm going to show, down to actually the business impact of every asset, and give a score to either the entire environment or to particular asset groups that are aligning to different business functions like end-of-life systems, testing environments, staging environments, production environments, and so on. The way this data is being collected is by the platform connecting to a lot of different tools and eventually taking data in from every tool that is involved in the vulnerability management program and the vulnerability remediation program. It could be your traditional infrastructure scanners, your newer generation scanners like Prisma Cloud for containers or cloud, your SaaS, your DAS, your open source scanners. All this data is being correlated and steered into Vulcan, and also combining with, as I said, the data from the other side. Data from ServiceNow, CMDB, data from directly from the cloud infrastructures, data from configuration management systems and patch management systems like Chef or Puppet or Ivanti or SSCM. All of these together are then compiled into different views that we can take out of the data in order to drive these things forward. The first step in moving from stage one to step two, as I said, is working on qualitative measurements. The first qualitative measurement is understanding your asset base, understanding how well you're managing your assets, and how these assets are configured and managed by the different tools that we are connected to. And these assets could be hosts, as you can see here. They could be code repositories and the number of vulnerabilities that they have. Could be dynamic applications that are scanned, and could be even Docker images and Kubernetes clusters that are also being scanned and associated with vulnerabilities from the different tools that we are connected to. Eventually, the goal is to collect as much data on the asset stance, from tags to business importance, to packages deployed, the different configurations that are coming in from the different tools in order to set a certain criticality bar to an asset particularly, but also to an asset group. When you look at these asset groups, and when you have the ability to start analyzing the scores of these groups, you can centralize your gaze into what is happening with every group and how every group should look when we are coming into understanding what is the risk posture between different areas of our business. And these groups could be subjected into a technical context like VMZ or staging or cloud, but could also be directly involved into business type of context like end of life or like our enterprise IT or others. So all these things together are eventually tied into the groups you are creating, and they are creating dynamically by different rule sets that you are applying in order to define what is your DMZ, or what is your production environment, or what is your staging environment. Once you have set these rules, the system learns what type of assets are connected to this different business function and group them together in a fairly easy way. Next step is taking all of this data and starting to compile a qualitative matrix also for vulnerabilities, where you are considering both the threat aspects, the technical aspects of a vulnerability, and the association to a certain business group. If we're looking at the entire environment, we will get a risk that is 79, but if we will look at only external-facing assets, our risk will differ because external-facing assets has higher importance or higher risk association than everything around. And you could also look at other areas that are less important, like end of life. End of life systems are at high risk, but maybe we can't do a lot to actually associate or do something to remediate in them. Now, as we dig in even deeper, I'm going to choose the vulnerability I've prepared in advance, particularly in Linux, because I know this is something that is less addressed in the current traditional vulnerability management programs. And as we mature them, we also need to address these areas, the areas of Linux, other areas of our vulnerability management program and our infrastructure. We're getting in and we're starting to see how this qualitative type of thinking is getting into place. We have a vulnerability here that its technical severity is not low, but it's not as high as it is here, 7.5 CVSS. But this vulnerability was found on 2 different assets that has high importance. They are associated to groups, groups that are found as critical to the business. And it was found also that this vulnerability is exploitable in the wild, and therefore there is a higher chance that it could be used and weaponized against you. This is why the risk of this vulnerability goes up. The last thing of this data-driven type of approach is actually being able to communicate what is the right thing to do from an IT perspective. And Vulcan here suggests solutions, 3 different solutions of 3 different types. One is the patch itself that is associated directly to the asset and can be delivered in a way that IT has the ability to actually operate. So Vulcan knows how to help you generate for IT the patching scripts that they need to write on their own, sometimes for weeks, because of the research of what are the dependencies and how should we write them and so on, in order to patch without taking the chances to break something or to miss something. Another thing that we can do, another thing that is part of this data-driven approach, still migrating to stage 2, is finding or providing alternative use cases to actually remediate a vulnerability. In this case, there is also a configuration change you can run to shut down the SEC service here, which is a service that is problematic, and download also here a script that will do it for you. Lastly, if you don't want to change everything, you could also use the firewall, in this case, the Red Hat firewall, to drive certain mitigations in order to apply them in the firewall, mitigate, but not change anything in the application or in the configuration of the asset in order to drive remediation forward. Now, this stage 2, taking smarter decisions based on data that is consolidated, correlated, and directly impacts and allows your ability to communicate better with IT and ops. Next, it's about orchestration. How can we automate more? How can we do more? How can we move from stage 2 to stage 3? And the first thing is individually doing that, driving actions directly to the tools our counterparts are using. If it's ServiceNow, if it's Jira, or even if it's directly to the tools, in this case, Ansible, but in other cases, like this one, which I know everyone are still facing, which is SSCM or Windows types of Patch Tuesday, for example, and actually helping you deliver this data directly to the consoles that IT are using, building the device collections, building the KB groups, choosing the most effective KB, the superseding KB to deploy, to eventually be waiting for IT to just click a button and drive a deployment. This saves a lot of time and a lot of friction and allows you to be more orchestrated. But to really take it to the next level, Vulcan also provides automation. Vulcan allows you to define rules and policies based on the manual work you're already doing and building something like every vulnerability that is coming from, let's take Qualys for this example, and has a risk score of critical in Vulcan, but also is associated with threats like exploits in the wild. Sorry, my computer somehow lost itself. There you go. Can you hear me, guys? That's it.
We can hear
now
you.
Where?
We can hear you. We can't see your screen yet.
It is. You can't see my screen. Okay, one sec. Let me see. I had a think bright dark here. Can you see it back on? Okay, apologies for that. Apologies for that. So backing up, as I said, an exploitable vulnerability that is critical. That is also remote code exploitable, and is involving a malware campaign to it on hosts that are running in our AWS and Azure environments and are found as external facing and are part of a business group we call database production, which is a group that we don't want to take any chances or wait even 1 second before we're starting to address these type of vulnerabilities in. And then we can start taking actions. Let's open a ServiceNow ticket on the right team, either incident or problem case, with already the Ansible scripts attached, either one ticket or separated, update the same ticket with new assets findings or put a new one. So really granular level, aligning ourselves to the IT process or to the DevOps processes, doesn't matter. We need to be the ones aligning, because if we are not the ones aligning, we're going to lose the battle. We're going to lose it, and we're not going to allow our counterparts to operate up to the point where we can actually send Ansible scripts or Chef scripts or build SSCM device collections and groups in order to drive this automatically. From the moment you will save this playbook, you will not have to start monitoring these vulnerabilities manually, these things that you will already act in the same way that you would act if you would have triaged them manually and let the platform do it for you. The way you're going to focus on that and have a common ground on communicating in this orchestrated state is based on two different abilities. One is what we call the campaign ability, eventually the ability to monitor a case, and in this case is look at the actions that were taken, the vulnerabilities you want to solve, the assets, how many of them are still fixed, how many of them are in progress. So a very clear eye on what is fixed based on rescans and what is still in progress and wasn't scanned, seeing all of the activity, every ticket that was updated, every ticket that was set as done, what is the status of the ticket, how much risk we have compiled. In this certain case, there's something weird. I can see that the ticket in Jira was closed. I can see that all the tickets are done, but I can still see 4 assets that are in progress, that were not remediated, they are critical, and they're part of critical environments, they're external facing, but there is nothing happening on the other end. So I can take another action directly from here and actually drive another Jira ticket on these 3 and say, listen, these 3 assets here, update on the same ticket or go to the unique ticket, drive and say, this is not something that was remediated, these 4 are still in progress, please drive remediation to it, including looking at our SLAs and how many vulnerabilities are breaching and so on. This is one side. The other side that helps us move from the orchestrated stage, stage 3, to the data-driven stage is starting to provide a visual way, both to ourselves, but also our counterparts, to actually look at the data in a way that they can align to. And this is why Vulcan had built a very robust BI engine at its backend to help both security people, but also business people who are accustomed to work with BI platforms to use the data within Vulcan without APIs or without extracting and getting everything you would get from your Tableau instance or Sisense instance or Power BI directly from the platform with no coding whatsoever, slicing and dicing the data to associate it directly with the teams that you have. And this is a capability that is improving and growing, and it will eventually allow different users to provide and build their own dashboards to help them take smarter risk decisions altogether. And this is the way we're migrating from a very reactive type of approach to a more data-driven, automated, and eventually transformative approach that will allow any user to get in either to Vulcan or to take the data from Vulcan and streamline it to their own native environment, to their Jiras, to their Chefs, to their ServiceNows, in a way where they can be more effective and drive further actions in their own native environments effectively and easily. Okay, so that's the whole game when it comes to Vulcan. Everyone, this is the time. If you have questions that we can answer, we'll be happy to do so. And David, I'm passing it back to you before I'm going to wrap it up with one last slide.
Thank you. Hold on, my camera is, there we go. I'm having camera problems, but you can hear me. Anybody have any questions, please use the Q&A function in BrightTalk right now. I don't show any questions, but I know our audience, as technical as we all are, probably has some. If you don't get your questions in today, have questions later on, please send me an email and I can. Oh, here we go. I
There
can
you are.
coordinate. Yeah, I can coordinate with Yaniv. I'll wrap this up, and if any more questions pop up, thank you very much, Yaniv. It was a very
Yeah.
interesting presentation. Love the way Vulcan brings that all together and as makes that little easier on everybody. As you said during the presentation, the time spent on remediations is not going to go down. And I also liked your point that security is not an island, and we need to work with the other teams and be able to support them as well as possible. Just did get a question. I don't know if you can see, Yaniv. It says, with everyone working from home, can you push updates to laptops? I'm assuming remote laptops that are not necessarily on a traditional network.
Yeah. So great question. The answer lies on the way your patching stack is built. So Vulcan knows how to get and connect to your patch managers, and will know how to orchestrate them in a way that while a laptop is connected and connected to the network, they'll have the ability to drive the patches effectively in this time slot. The goal or the key to this is using the tools you already have on your laptop. So it could be directly through the patch manager, but it could also be sometimes applying mitigating controls, like using ADRs in the form of CrowdStrike, for example, to actually allow mitigations until the laptop will come in. I know there is a challenge when it comes to connecting these laptops to the enterprise network when we are talking about on-prem patch managers, and this is where Vulcan can help orchestrate the process to make sure that in the gaps you're mitigated, and once the laptop is connected, then we're driving it forward. So the answer is definitely yes, but we're tied in directly to your patching stack.
Great, thank you.
Wonderful. So, without further ado, I want to say thank you very much also for the opportunity to speak here. Thank you, David. I want to encourage everyone, if what you've heard today made some sense, and you feel that there is room to improve your vulnerability management program and turn it into a more remediation-driven program. If you're facing challenges around working correctly with IT and DevOps and engineering, Vulcan is hosting on October 29th. It's hosting what we call the Remediation Summit. We have amazing speakers from companies like Snowflake, Akamai, HBO Max, Levi. We're going to come up with a couple of new products and product announcements that are very exciting, including one very, very, very special treat around Remedy Cloud and what we're going to do with it. And we are definitely looking forward to seeing you all. Feel free to register to the summit and come in and listen in. I want to thank everyone again for the opportunity, for the attention, and live long and prosper, everyone.